All right, so this is our second question and answer session. Thank you for the questions. There was some really excellent ones. And again, the issue here is, this doesn't quite replicate the, classroom experience, but the goal is to get some sense of, of feedback. So let's start right away with these two questions. So first one, as I mentioned, that although it was considered too extreme, some ideas from the Hamilton plan eventually worked their way into the Constitution later on. So how exactly did Hamilton's ideas go from too extreme to becoming part of the Constitution? People began to latch onto Hamilton ideas, alterations made. Did anything from Hamilton plan make its way to the Constitution exactly as it was originally? And then the second question, which is actually related to this one, came from another student at the Electoral College. How does it work? Can I explain it more? So let's start with this issue of the Hamilton plan, which did become, or aspects of it became more attractive as the Constitutional Convention went on. And in part, this was due to a fear that the Constitution as structured was neutering the power of the president and giving the Senate too much power. And I mentioned in the snippets and in a couple of the group sessions we talked about the partition of Poland, which was occurring as the Constitutional Convention was happening. So the first wave of the Polish partition, you can see the key here over here on the right, had already occurred in 1772. The second wave is going to come right after, shortly after the Constitutional Convention, 1793, and then Poland vanishes from the map in 1795. At the in the middle of the convention, the sense was first that the Senate would choose the president, and second that the Senate would have significant foreign policy powers, including the power to negotiate treaties. And the Polish example was cited as an example of why that wasn't a good idea. So Poland, as I mentioned, had this very, very strange system of government with an elected monarchy that was elected by a legislature that was mostly a council of nobles in Poland, but had the effect of the Russians and the Austro-Hungarians and the Prussians. When the king would die, each of these surrounding empires would try to influence the Polish legislature to have them elect a king that would be sympathetic to the Russians or to the Austrians or to the Prussians. And so the result was the creation of a system in which the manner of electing the monarch seemed to encourage outside intervention in the domestic politics of Poland. And there was this concern as the convention went on that perhaps having the Senate choose the president would have the same effect. Meanwhile, at the same time, the framers did not want a direct popular election of the president because they were too worried about the passions of the mob and the idea of demagoguery. And Hamilton's plan had this alternative of using the an electoral college as a way of substituting for the election of for the Senate election of the president. So one of the important subsidiary aspects of the Constitutional Convention was this movement to clip the power of the Senate and to expand the power of the executive branch, or at least to make the executive branch more independent of the Senate. So treaty making power, similarly, the shift comes from the Senate negotiating treaties to a system where the president would negotiate treaties subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. And that was, they're singing Hamilton's tune here in this regard. So, in part, this is the framers kind of changing it. Second, at the tail end of the convention, as things are wrapping up, there's this committee created called the Committee of Style, which includes 5 members, including both Hamilton and Madison, although the dominant figure in this committee is Gouverneur Morris, also a strong Federalist from Pennsylvania. And that committee prepares the Constitution for final consideration by the entire convention and makes minor changes, but the changes have the effect of strengthening both the national government and the executive branch. So it's it's not so much that the Hamilton Plan becomes the basis for the selection, although again the Electoral College, there's this relationship with Hamilton, but the sense that the convention as a whole becomes more sympathetic to the Hamilton idea as the consensus emerges that perhaps they're not making the presidency powerful enough, and in particular that they're making the presidency too dependent on the legislature. Which of course brings us to the Electoral College, which Hamilton idea, which does make it into the final version of the Constitution. And to me, the way I think of the Electoral College anyway is that it's comparable to the Council of Censors, this kind of crazy idea for the Pennsylvania state constitution, or the Governor's Council and the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. There was this sense of constitutional experimentation in the Revolutionary era, and the Electoral College was basically the aspect of the U.S. Constitution that fit into this pattern. It was like, oh, this sounds like a good idea. It's never really been done before, but what could possibly go wrong? And the idea behind the Electoral College was that the electors would serve as buffers between the people and the selection of the presidency. And as intended by Hamilton, and I think by most members of the convention, the idea would be that that people, the individual voters, would vote for electors in whom they had confidence, without any real sense of who these electors might vote for president. This becomes a very fanciful idea. And then these electors would get together and discuss who is the most virtuous leader, and select that leader for the office. So it was not designed to function in a two-party system where you basically just have slates of electors who do no independent thinking at all. They cast their ballots for Biden or for Trump because they're ultra committed Democrats or ultra committed Republicans, and that's what they're going to do. That was never how it was intended to work. But of course, part of the problem here is because the Electoral College was kind of inserted into the Constitution very late in the game, the convention didn't really think through potential problems with the Electoral College. And so, in this respect, they kind of, got what they deserved. Second question. So why was the Bill of Rights, what's implemented, not just considered the Constitution? So instead of having these separate and get connected laws, why was it simply not just added into the Constitution? Why is there a separate concept known as the Bill of Rights? And then similarly here, given that the necessary and proper clause could outweigh reasonable checks on Congress in certain instances, why was the Brutus advice not taken into consideration, and no modifications were done to the necessary and proper clause? And these two questions I think are related, and the answer to them comes in the first federal Congress. This is a painting of the first federal Congress. Um, and the specific tactical decisions that James Madison, who was on the Judiciary Committee and really is the key player in terms of adoption of the Bill of Rights, made. And there are 2 points related to these questions. The first was Madison's belief, and I think here in retrospect he made the correct choice, that amendments needed to be separated from the text of the Constitution itself, because otherwise, and one proposal was to say, all right, we're going to have a freedom of speech provision, and so we'll go into Article 1, Section 8, or Article 1, Section 9, and include a passage saying Congress has no power to pass a law restricting freedom of speech or freedom of conscience or freedom of assembly. And Madison's argument here is that what you would then have is that the amendment process would kind of function as a permanent constitutional convention, constantly adjusting the specifics of the document itself. And he said that just isn't right. What we need is for the amendments to come at the end of the document, so they're distinguished from the original document itself, to make clear that the amendments are altering the document, but also providing a reminder of what the document ultimately gave. And this is a pattern, and we're going to or I'm going to be talking about this next week in the snippets. That the first federal Congress makes a bunch of decisions that in effect become precedent and wind up being followed for the rest of American history. And this is one of them. That, they could have decided this the other way and taken an approach, all right, the amendment process means you alter the text of the Constitution itself. You don't write separate amendments at all, but that choice is not made. Similarly, Madison, relating to the second question about the necessary and proper clause, Madison wants amendments that reflect legitimate concerns of the anti-federalists and other critics of the Constitution, but do not alter the fundamental structure of the Constitution itself. And so, the Bill of Rights really, Madison is not interested in revisiting some of the key debates from the Constitutional Convention and say weakening the power of the legislative branch. He's just not willing to go there. And so, even though these critiques come from, I think Brutus and in the most sort of nuanced way, and lots of other anti-federalists as well, that's not an area where Madison or any of the other Federalists have any real interest in going in terms of constitutional amendments. All right, next question. Two questions from different students, both dealing with the same topic. Why did the original First Amendment involve the issue of the size of congressional districts? And if adopted, why couldn't the size of districts simply have been changed as the country grew in population? So the second question first, if adopted, this original First Amendment, any change in that would have required a constitutional amendment in and of itself. And so if we had gone down that path, there would have been a situation in which, every 20 or 30 years, we need a new constitutional amendment to say, all right, it's one representative per 200,000 or 300,000 citizens. So this issue would have become over and over again a constitutional issue. Instead, it is exclusively a statutory issue. So it is Congress that has passed a law saying that there will be 435 members of the House of Representatives. If they wanted to tomorrow, Congress could pass a law saying there should be 2,000 members of the House of Representatives. So, by not including the issue of the size of districts in the Constitution, it allowed for the legislature to make that decision and change it as they wanted through laws. But if it had been if the First Amendment, as Madison had proposed, had been adopted, the only way to have changed that would have been through another constitutional amendment. On the issue of why the original First Amendment involved this issue, keep in mind that part of the the approach by Madison was to respond to legitimate and popular critiques of the Constitution from anti-federalists, and this is an excerpt from the third Brutus paper. Kind of outlines the key section here in red. Anti-federalists just hammered this issue over and over again. Their argument was that the Constitution was flawed because it did not provide sufficiently narrow representation. They envision a system in which the ideal legislative district is one in which the legislator knows basically most of the constituents in the legislator's district, and therefore can accurately represent these people in Congress. And so this was a point, to the extent that the goal of the Bill of Rights was to respond to significant criticisms coming from the anti-federalists, this issue of representation and size of congressional districts was one that was very much on the anti-federalists' mind. And so, in some ways, it's interesting that all of these other amendments are able to get through, but this one, while it's passed by Congress, never gets sufficient ratification by the states. And then the last question: American politics have changed a bit since the framing of the Constitution. Framers missed things, for instance, with the political parties. And so, in retrospect, could the framers have written the Constitution differently in order to avoid today's political reality? And is our political reality today a function of the failures of the framers? And I think here the answer is probably yes and no, and a nicely and inconclusive answer. But I think that there are at least two aspects of the Constitution where the decisions of the framers, do have a significant and direct effect on contemporary American political culture. The first is the nature of the Senate. Um, and in the Constitution is clear that we have this amendment process, but one aspect which is not in, which cannot be amended, is the issue of the Senate. The Senate will have to remain in place, 2 members per body. This is a map of the current Senate, and what you should notice here is that what had used to be a fairly common practice in the United States, in which you'd have one senator from one party and one senator from another party in the state, now is almost entirely vanishing. So the red states are states that have 2 Republican senators. The blue states are states that have 2 Democratic senators. There are only 6 states: Montana, Wisconsin, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maine, where there's an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, and then a Republican, Susan Collins. So only 6 states that have 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. So the Senate, in a lot of ways, has become this very, very partisan body where the red states elect Republicans, the blue states elect Democrats, and that's it. And that's something that is very unusual in over the course of U.S. history. So it's entirely possible that if the framers could have anticipated this degree of party polarization in the election of senators, they might have framed the Senate differently. Maybe created more states or proportional representation, or whatever they might have done. But this is one way in which the choice that was made in 1787, I think, continues to affect our politics. And the Senate, has there's a much greater gap in terms of the size of the Senate between the smallest state and the largest state than was the case at the convention. So in 1787, the gap is roughly 1 to 9. That is, the most populous state, Virginia, is around 9 times more populous than the least populous state, Delaware. That margin now is around 1 to 65. So the least populous state, Wyoming, California, the most populous state, has 65 times more people than Wyoming. And so, which means if you are a Wyoming citizen, your vote counts for more than if you're a California citizen, or a New York citizen, or Texas, or Florida. And so these kinds of population disparities are something that I don't think the framers anticipated. And then the second thing, this is from Article 5 of the Constitution. It outlines the amendment process. You need 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states. The framers appear to have envisioned the amendment process as a feasible process. That is, that they wanted to make sure that the Constitution couldn't simply be amended willy-nilly, but they also wanted to be sure that there was a way to amend the Constitution. In our current political environment, and this really has existed now for several decades, even before the kind of intense political polarization we've seen in the last couple of decades, it's basically inconceivable for to have a substantive political a constitutional amendment passed. I mean, and I think the last one really was the 19th Amendment, the women's suffrage amendment, one of 4 progressive era amendments that do have very, very meaningful changes in terms of the structure of the Constitution: income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition, and women's suffrage. But in our current environment, there are enough red states that are going to block any constitutional amendment that deals with a kind of liberal reform, and there are enough blue states that would block any constitutional amendment that deals with a conservative reform. And I suspect, because the framers did want there to be a possibility to amend the Constitution, that if they could come back and rewrite it, they would rewrite Article 5 to maybe lower the threshold for the amendment process. So those are the questions that we have for this week. Very, very good questions, so keep them coming next time, and I will talk to you soon.